Welcome to the Sunday service for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola. I'm Reverend Alice Silty, and it's my pleasure to be able to welcome everyone to our service this morning. In these trying times, it's a true honor to be able to serve a congregation whose mission is to celebrate diversity, strive for justice, and inspire love. As we come together this morning, our chalice will be lit by Lauren and Maddie, followed by music for centering, played by Denise D'Angelo.
Hi, I'm Lauren and this is Maddie. Hi. And our chalice reading for today are the words of Audre Lorde, the writer and poet, from her book Sister Outsider, Essays and Speeches. Sometimes we are blessed with being able to choose the time and the arena and the manner of our revolution, but more usually we must do battle where we are standing.
Our theme for June is compassion, and June is also Pride Month. So I open this morning with words from the Reverend Hannah Roberts Villeneuve, Unitarian Universalist minister in Cheyenne, Wyoming. People sometimes ask, is pride a protest or a party? And the answer is, of course, yes. And why not? Why not rejoice as we resist, dance as we demand change, celebrate as we create community that delights in all of who we are? So bring all of that with you this morning. Bring your policy demands, bring your glitter, bring your Supreme Court broken heart, bring your rainbow socks, bring your emptiness that you feel for our siblings gone too soon. Bring your Gloria Estefan remix, bring your tender hope for change, bring your most garish eyeshadow, bring your spirit tattered and battered by a world that seems insistent on choosing fear and hate. Gather up all these things and bring them here to a place where we don't have to shoulder these burdens or celebrate these joys alone. Come. Let us worship together. One of the ways that we share our lives with each other in this congregation is through the sharing of joys and sorrows. And because we are unable to meet together within our building, we have found other ways to do that. And so today I don't have any particular joys and sorrows that I've been asked to share, but as always, we know there are many joys and sorrows people hold in their hearts that are unspoken. And so we honor those this morning. We also have a covenant, the words we say together every Sunday. So I invite you to say those words with me now. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. 50 years ago this month, the first Pride parades were held in memory of the riots that erupted 1 year earlier, 1969, after a brutal police raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar at 43 Christopher Street in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, New York City. After most Pride activities were postponed or canceled this year in response to the pandemic, police brutality again became the center of a movement aimed at calling attention to and dismantling systems of injustice and oppression and racism based in fear and bigotry and hate aimed at particular populations. So in many cities across our country, Pride and Black Lives Matter are joining together in their mutual understanding of the devastating presence of police brutality, which lies at the heart or at the root of both of these movements. Ashley Smith, president of Capital Pride Alliance Board of Directors in DC, said the organization would postpone some of its virtual events so that it could focus on its support for Black Lives Matter protests and advocacy work to fight police brutality and racism. Also, Global Pride 2020 has said that its event will focus now on some of the issues raised by Black Lives Matter organizations in the U.S., including police brutality, racism, and discrimination. Natalie Thompson spoke out and said, as a Black woman in the LGBTQIA+ community, I feel we must confront the systemic racism and violence facing my Black brothers, sisters, and non-binary siblings in the larger culture and within the LGBTQIA community. Natalie Thompson is the co-chair of the Global Pride Organizing Committee. She also said, I could not think of a larger platform than Global Pride to do this. Some years ago, during the debate for marriage equality, our then Unitarian Universalist Association president, Reverend Bill Sinkford, was attending some meetings. After the meetings, he came back into our UUA headquarters on Beacon Street, and Jason Shelton, who is now the Reverend Jason Shelton, at that time was the music minister at the Nashville UU Church, was there. And he asked Bill, how did it go? What did you say? And Bill said, I told them we stand on the side of love. Well, out of that came the song that Jason Shelton wrote, Standing on the Side of Love. And from that, a movement and our yellow t-shirts and our desire to let people know that we are on the side of love in everything we do. And so now the campaign is called Side with Love. And we still have the song, Standing on the Side of Love. So I wanted us to hear that today. There's some pictures in the video celebrating that time. And we know that some things have gone backwards since then, but we keep on trying and we keep celebrating the milestones and working even harder for justice.
tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are standing on the side of love, hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are standing on the side of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are standing on the side of love, hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are standing on the side of love. We are standing on the side of love. Our hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are standing on the side of love. We are standing on the side of love.
Each Sunday when we come together, we give one another the opportunity to contribute to the well-being of our congregation. When we pass the plate on a Sunday, it is an opportunity to give above and beyond what you might normally give or what you pledge to the church. And it's a significant contribution that matters to the congregation. So I am going to let you listen to some music while you see the slide that tells you how to text and give. message today comes to us from regional staff members Connie Goodbread and the Reverend Carlton Smith. They have put together a dialogical sermon for all of us with a message quite appropriate for today of courage and hope and joy. I welcome them in this Sunday service.
I'm Connie Goodbread. I am one of the co-leads of your Southern Region Congregational Life staff team.
And I'm Reverend Carlton E. Smith, also a member of the Congregational Life staff based out of Holly Springs, Mississippi.
We're going to start this morning reading the covenant that we use at the leadership experiences that the Southern Region holds with members of leaders and congregations. It's based on The 5 Smooth Stones of Liberal Religion that was an essay by James Luther Adams. With hope for a bright future, I come in trust. With love in my heart for all of creation, I come in humility. Seeking justice for all, marginalizing none, I come in open-mindedness. With courage, I come willing to be transformed. With great joy, I come to bind myself to you so that together we can do what I cannot do alone.
And the title of this sermon is Take Courage, Friends, which is a line from a reading inside of our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. And this is another one of our dialogical sermons, a sermon in which we believe that the Spirit, that God, that the universe lives inside of our words, inside of our sharing, and that we can learn and grow from this. And some of this, we know what we're going to say. We have some ideas about what we're going to say. And some of it we're going to discover as we're talking to each other right now.
Thank you, Carlton. So the line in the covenant that we're focused in on today is, with courage, I come willing to be transformed. Maya Angelou says, courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any of the other virtues consistently. I think that that is a brilliant quote, and I think of the courage that it takes to love and the immense courage it takes to work for, march for, live for justice. I also think that the line in this line out of this covenant, with courage I come willing to be transformed, is a pretty big promise. I think courage shows up for people in different ways. For some people, I think it's a courageous act just to get out of bed in the morning. For others, acts of courage can be terrifying, and some people are in much greater danger than others. So, Carlton, as we're talking about courage, I'm wondering, what does courage mean to you, and where do you find it?
So when I think about courage, I am a person who really loves etymology and getting into the meaning of words, the original source of them. And as far as courage goes, it comes from a Latin root word that is about the heart. It refers to the heart. So when we're talking about courage, we're talking about that deepest part of us, that part of us from which motivation and inspiration comes. And it has to do with our essence. So when we talk about being willing to transform and having the courage to do that, we're talking about the courage to transform our very hearts and from within. I think it's very powerful to refer to some of the teachings we get from Brene Brown, who's the writer who's become very well known in the past decade or so, I would say, who had a very famous TED Talk about courage and vulnerability and shame, and talking about how courage is so essential to all of the things that we want success in life with, whether we're, as you were saying before, just getting out of bed in the morning, or trying to start a movement, or applying for some new position. All of these things take courage. And one of the things I wanted to share from one of her readings, she had a book called Daring Greatly. And it was based on a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And I think it's really powerful and gives us some insight into this thing called courage. It's the man in the arena speech is quote is what it's known as. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms and the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that its place shall never be with those cold, timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So to me, this quote speaks very much to the courage that we need to be able to step forward, because what are we afraid of? We're afraid we're going to fail. We're afraid we're going to embarrass ourselves. We're afraid we're not going to achieve that thing that we go after. So someone's going to hold us accountable for it. But I would rather live my life daring greatly, because I value courage. I value those who've gone before me, who've been exemplars of courage. And so those include my ancestors here in the state of Mississippi, my spiritual ancestors like Ida B. Wells Barnett and Medgar Evers, Vernon Dahmer, Fannie Lou Hamer, all of these people who against great odds stepped up and did what they felt like they needed to do in the moment and responded with courage rather than with fear and timidity. And not that they always succeeded. So I'll give you an example around Fannie Lou Hamer. They were seeking to be seated as the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party at the Democratic Convention back in the 1960s. They did not succeed in achieving those seats as the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, fighting for change and transformation of access to the polls for Mississippians at the time. But the Democratic Party hasn't been the same since. So even though they didn't win in that moment, they succeeded ultimately in the transformation of what the Democratic Party has come to mean and represent. So sometimes, we can have the courage and we cannot succeed at what it is we're actually going for, and nevertheless have a tremendous impact because we dared greatly.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I was going to mention too is just thinking about being in Boston at the time of the marriage equality debates going back and forth, and being at the State House and looking at these people shouting and yelling at one another across the street, as people were saying, no, we want marriage. Yes, we want marriage equality. And other people saying, no, we don't want marriage equality. And I was thinking, as I was looking at all that shouting and screaming, some of these conversations needed to happen around kitchen tables at people's homes. And from that standpoint, it takes courage to even be able to confront our relatives, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles with whom we have differing opinions, who might not believe in full equality for everyone. And sometimes I would say that that's where the change of heart needs to happen, is amongst our family members, maybe even before we head out in the streets. We might want to check to see if we want to have some of those difficult conversations first with the people closest to us, which can be really hard.
Right. Yeah, I mean, culturally, we've been told for my whole life, the things that you don't talk about are politics, religion, and sex. And if we're not talking about that, the only things we're talking about are the weather and money, gossip. Those are the things that we spend our days talking about. I agree with you. I would rather burn my candle at both ends and be all used up, having given it my all and failed, than to do nothing. And that's not a successful life. When my granddaughters and my grandson asked me where I was when this all happened, I want to be able to tell a story of courage, not a story of a lack of courage. And it isn't that we're not going to be afraid. I actually have thought several times that because our congregations and we as human beings, it's not just Unitarian Universalists, it's certainly human beings, are conflict avoidant for the most part. And I think that one of the realities is that we have to embrace the kinds of conflict that are the real work, but we have to be able to identify what that is. So not get into the petty arguments and spend all of our energy on the petty parts of what goes on in life, but to actually spend ourselves on what the real work is. And that's hard to define, isn't it?
It is.
Because it gets complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So you bump into, I think of Charlottesville. You and I had that conversation about Charlottesville and how there was a clear goal. It was you knew why. And so much of what we do around justice and around loving fiercely is we take a step forward and then we recognize that things are way more complicated than we had originally thought, and things get unclear. So one of the things that I've noticed in Unitarian Universalist congregations is how conflict avoidant we are. And that actually brings us back to the first line in our covenant: with hope for a bright future, I come in trust. Because we haven't taken the time to build the trust that we need to have with one another, so that when things break down, conflict isn't destructive, it's creative. And I've also heard a number of people talking about hope being for the privileged and hope being not accessible to everyone. And I think that that's true. And I also think that I mean courageous hope. I don't think that I mean the kind of hope where I sit back and say, well, I'm just going to hope for this thing to happen. No, hope for me only happens after a hard day's work, after sweat, after my hands are dirty, after I've joined with others in the work. So that's when hope is alive for me. It's seldom alive when it's not bound to the justice and love piece of this too. So I also think that trust is almost the missing ingredient in Unitarian Universalism. So, and it takes courage to be trustful. It takes courage to be trustworthy. And we have to do both of those things. I have to come to you in trust. And that doesn't mean that now that I trust you, you won't ever make a mistake. No, I trust that you will make mistakes. And I hope you trust that I will make mistakes. And we will have the courage to face those mistakes and own them, own our own, and then move forward together in a whole different kind of way, with trust even stronger. So I think that it's important for us to remember that all of these, that hope and love and justice and courage and joy, are kind of bound to one another also, and that they need one another in order to be real inside of us and then made real, manifest in the world. So each of us must be willing to take these values into our hearts to make a difference in the world.
Indeed. Yes. And one last thought I would have to share has to do with the courage that it takes to step into a role of leadership. Because even as this reading that I shared from Theodore Roosevelt indicates, it's like there are going to be people who have something to say about it. I've got colleagues now, ministerial colleagues, who are in a very tight spot because on the one hand, their congregations want to be represented in those who are in the throngs, who are marching on our cities in the wake of George Floyd's killing. And then people all around the world are, out in the streets and doing those kinds of marches. Some of them in the hearts of cities where it's very challenging now and quite potentially dangerous, from a variety of different angles. And these ministers are having to choose. It's like, well, do I take the parishioners that I have from the suburbs who will follow me anywhere down into the center of these cities where it's very dangerous for them? These people who might have compromised health or might be elderly and might have things that they're dealing with, or do we stay out in the suburbs and do our protest here? And I would say that, for anyone who's stepping into those leadership roles, that I acknowledge that and affirm the difficulty of it. And it's going to be difficult, and there are going to be people who aren't going to like the choices that we make, but we still have to make them just the same. And I guess I would say too, to those people who are congregants within congregations, try trusting your leadership. You were talking about trust earlier. Trust that they might have information or concerns that might be different from yours, and allow for the possibility that they are trying to do the best that they can do, and dare to even support them, those that you've called to work with you. So these are things that I'm thinking as well.
Absolutely. The courage to stay at the table when things get difficult. And things are pretty difficult, aren't they?
Very difficult right now. Exceedingly. And in that spirit, I would offer these words as a prayer. These are the words, as we close, these are the words of Wayne Arneson, a ministerial colleague who was very much involved in the civil rights movement back in the 60s. And it goes like this: take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. Okay. May it be so.
May it be so. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie.
Spirit of Life must be the most often sung song in our Unitarian Universalist hymnal. It was written by Carolyn McDade shortly after the assassination of Harvey Milk, the openly gay San Francisco city supervisor. She tells of going to her friend Pat's house and telling her, "I feel like a piece of dried cardboard that has lain in the attic for years. Just open wide the door and I'll be dust." She said, "I was tired, not with my community, but with the world." She just sat with me, she said about her friend, and I loved her for sitting with me. Then Carolyn McDade drove home and she wrote, "I walked through my house in the dark, found my piano, and that was my prayer. May I not drop out. It was not written, but prayed. I knew more than anything that I wanted to continue in faith with the movement." So the song that started as a prayer has become one of our most important songs. And when we sing it, I'm not sure we think of it as a social justice song. Today I invite you to sing along with Denise this very important song in our tradition, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free.
participated in today's service, and I'd like to close with these words from Thich Nhat Hanh. In a time of anger or despair, even if we feel overwhelmed, our love is still there. Our capacity to communicate, to forgive, to be compassionate is still there. You have to believe this. We are more than our anger. We are more than our suffering. We must recognize that we do have within us the capacity to love, to understand, to be compassionate, always. May we go in peace.